Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by the managing editor of Horns247, Taylor Estes. Taylor, it is Texas-Alabama week. The Longhorns and Crimson Tide have not played since that 2009 season national championship game. And Texas leads this series 7-1-1. That is Alabama's only win over Texas. And it dates back to like 1902. And Alabama's making its first trip to Austin, Texas since 1922. And of course, there's great history between these two programs. Darrell Royal, Bear Bryant. They met in the 1965 Orange Bowl when Tommy Nobis stuffed Joe Namath at the goal line to end the game. And someone asked Tommy Nobis, how close was Joe Namath to the goal line? And Tommy Nobis said, this far. So it's great stuff. Nick Saban, of course. My gosh, there was a group of Texas boosters who wanted to hire him. In 2013, Mac Brown, who was supposed to get fired by Steve Patterson, but Steve Patterson didn't fire Mac. That snafu delay cost the big money guys at Texas any chance of talking to Nick Saban. And according to Tom Hicks, who is one of Texas's biggest, most powerful boosters, that situation was a lot closer to happening than people realize. So Nick Saban coming back to Austin, whether his wife was really looking for a house or not, Taylor, Nick Saban's coming back to Austin, this time with bad intentions.
That is not somebody I think that you want to mess around with if he's coming to your home, right, Chip? I mean, the storylines with this game are totally endless between Texas and Alabama, whether you look at, their last meeting, as you mentioned, being that BCS national title game. There are still a lot of Texas fans and people in this part of the country that believe that if Colt McCoy didn't leave that game with an injury, Texas would have probably steamrolled them, which could have changed, honestly, the trajectory of both programs. I mean, that was Nick Saban's first national title at Alabama as the Alabama head coach. And then obviously he's gone on to kind of have a dynasty there with the Crimson Tide, where Texas has gone in the opposite direction. I mean, the storylines really, that's just one. I mean, look at the staff that Texas has. How many of those coaches have coached under Nick Saban, and not just, from that 2020 national championship team that Alabama fielded. But, even with Bo Davis, he spent 2 different stints at Alabama, including the first BCS title win against Texas, too. He's won 2 titles with Alabama in 2 different stints. I mean, everything this is just kind of playing out to be one of those rare type of moments, those rare type of games that you get in college football non-conference play. Obviously, this is going to be a bigger deal in the future because I feel like Texas and Alabama will probably meet much more, consistently once Texas and Oklahoma go to the SEC. But no doubt, all eyes are on this game, Chip, and the experts in Vegas are not giving the Longhorns too much chance here in this one, though.
No, they're not. The line opened at 19 and quickly went to 20. And Texas is at home. By our account, Texas has never been a 20-point home dog since point spreads became a thing in the 1940s. Now, if someone has alternate information, please pass it along, because that is not something that the Texas sports media guide has. Now, Phil Steele has the lines from previous games, but nonetheless, Texas is a 20-point home dog. So, Taylor, this is a situation where Texas should be playing loose and free and brave and just let it all hang. because no one is expecting Texas to win this game. And it's like they get a free shot at trying to take down the number one team in the country. And, stranger things have happened, Taylor. Texas had a crazy run against Nebraska when Nebraska was a national championship contender starting in 1996 with that Big 12 title game, when if Nebraska wins it, they're going to the Orange Bowl to play for the national championship. And they were a 21-point favorite, and Texas beat them by 10. Now, that team had Priest Holmes, Ricky Williams, a loaded offensive line, Casey Hampton, a lot of experience. James Brown was a third-year quarterback at that time. Texas doesn't have that this time. In fact, the better matchup for Texas is going to happen next year in Tuscaloosa when Bryce Young is gone and Will Anderson is gone and some of these other NFL prospects that Alabama has on their roster. Jordan Battle, the safety, when those guys are all gone and Texas is a year older at quarterback, a year older on the offensive line, that roster has a better chance against Alabama than this one on paper. Now,
on paper, I was going to say, we say that now. Alabama's constantly reloading, though, too.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. In fact, I was reminded today that Alabama has a freshman nose tackle whose name is Jahir Otis. Oh, yeah. 370 pounds.
True freshman or redshirt freshman?
Jaheim Otis, sorry. Well, that's a good question. But Jaheim Otis is 370 pounds, and he played against Utah State last week. So this is going to be a lot.
It's a true freshman. He's a true freshman. Good
true freshman. Yeah, Jaheim Otis. And Alabama plays a 3-man line with Will Anderson as a stand-up outside linebacker. And so Jaheim Otis will be head up on Jake Majors, who will be outweighed by 70 pounds in that matchup. So this is just going to be fascinating to see how Steve Sarkisian, who knows the Alabama defensive staff very well. Pete Golding, we've said, we believe Steve Sarkisian wanted to hire Pete Golding from Alabama to be his defensive coordinator. And that's why all those other assistant coaches were hired first, because Sarkisian thought he was going to be able to bring in Pete Golding, probably ran some names by Pete Golding. But then after Sarkisian hired Jeff Banks from Alabama to be the special teams coordinator and tight ends coach at Texas, Saban basically said, look, dude, enough is enough.
Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane.
Yeah, I'm the guy who gave you a second chance in coaching. Don't forget, you don't need to show me your thanks by rating my staff of one of its best recruiters and best coaches, Jeff Banks.
Yeah.
And look what happened last week, Taylor. Jeff Banks, they defer. They give the ball to Louisiana Monroe with the full intention of trying to block the punt of Louisiana Monroe, stop them, block the punt, and it works to perfection. They end up scoring a touch. The first points of the season were scored on Deshaun Jameson's blocked punt and Keelan Robinson's scoop and score. So that's what Jeff Banks means to this Texas staff. And who knows what he's got up his sleeve for Alabama. So there is familiarity between these two programs. And talking to the Texas players, they were saying how Jaleel Billingsley, Agiye Hall, and Keelan Robinson were giving them little tidbits of Tide tendencies. And you're just thinking, well, can that really help? I mean, in the heat of battle, when you're dog tired and it's probably 100+ degrees on the field, are you really going to be locked in on whatever that little nugget was that Agiye Hall gave you about a cornerback or Jaleel Billingsley gave you about Will Anderson. I don't know, maybe, but
maybe.
I mean, Steve Sarkisian is going to have to call the game of his life. Texas players are going to have, as Jatavian Sanders said, the week of practice of their lives, because he said it. He said, Alabama can blow you out easily, he said, if we don't have the best practice of our lives. So this is fascinating because no one is giving Texas any credit. Now, Taylor, was anyone giving A&M credit last year in College Station when Zach Calzada took over at quarterback for the Aggies and played the game of his life and beat the Crimson Tide?
No, I
And
mean, nobody was giving credit then. But if you look at that game, I think that the key is that you've got to get after Bryce Young. That's what A&M did. I mean, if you're Steve Sarkisian, and mind you, that was such an anomaly game too. It's hard to even say, oh, take a page out of A&M's playbook a little bit, because Nick Saban is such a good coach. I would be shocked if he gets beat twice the same exact way, especially in back-to-back years. And especially two of his former assistant coaches. I mean, it's not in his makeup, it's not in his DNA. And one thing that was interesting in the A&M Alabama game last year was there were two special teams touchdowns in back-to-back plays, with Alabama blocking a punt to returning it. Then A&M returns the kickoff. I think it was like 96 yards. Devin Achane returns it to the house. And that really was the shift in the game a little bit more for A&M, because it was 7-point. I think it was a 7-point game when that happened. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but that worked last year. Who's to say that's going to work this year? It's hard to even look back at last year's team, I think, Chip, when you look at the games where Alabama may not have played their best game or lost, like how they did to Texas A&M. It's just really difficult for me to even think that Steve Sarkisian and his staff can look at that game and be like, oh yes, those are some tendencies that we're going to see again this season. I don't see that playing out, just because of the type of coach that Nick Saban is. I mean, he is the best college football coach in history. I think it's fair to say that. And, one of the other ones, Bear Bryant too, that happened to be a coach at Alabama as well. It's really hard for me to even think that there's something that the staff could have seen that the Crimson Tide did last year in that lost A&M that they're going to replicate this year, just because of how successful Nick Saban has been in making sure that he doesn't get beat twice, especially the same way.
yeah, I mean, you look at, well, first of all, Alabama's not going to get caught looking ahead, okay?
No.
Because do you know who the Crimson Tide play after they play Texas? Louisiana Monroe.
Yeah.
And they just watched Texas pummel the Warhawks 52-10. So Alabama their full attention is focused on Texas.
And probably has been, as Sark said, for the last number of months too.
Yeah. And Nick Saban's hearing about how Jimbo Fisher beat him last year. Kirby Smart beat him last year. Nick was 24-0 against assistant coaches, and then he loses 2 of 3 to assistants last year. He did beat Kirby Smart in the regular season, then lost to him in the national championship game. But Nick's pissed.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to be looking to put Sarkisian in his place. And here's the thing. There are areas where Alabama appears to be not as strong as they've been in the past. Let's put it that way.
I was going to say, if you say weak, I'm going to be like, just shut it down right
No.
here.
None of that. But at wide receiver, no Jamison Williams, no John Mechie. And this is after a string of receivers, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy. And so we're not quite sure. I mean, although Bryce Young threw it to 11 guys against Utah State, that's a team that went 11-3 last year, by the way, Utah State. And the offensive line was sort of up and down last year. And they're not, some of those 4 of those guys are back. Three of those guys. Sorry, they have new tackles, but they did bring in a transfer to shore up one of those tackle spots. So, but they lost Evan Neal, first round draft pick, left tackle to the NFL. Those are like the two areas, that and Cameron Latou, their tight end, the guy who beat out Jaleel Billingsley, the guy who was a defensive end. They moved him to tight end, and the guy had a record year for tight end touchdowns last year at Alabama, set the record, 8. And Jaleel Billingsley's like, I'm out. And so Cameron Latou did not play last week against Utah State, but he is back in the depth chart this week. He had been injured, and so Cameron Latou at tight end for Alabama coming back this week is big, although Alabama didn't need him in that 55-0 trouncing of Utah State. So if you're Pete Kwiatkowski and Gary Patterson and DeMarvion Overshown and, whoever else is going to be counted on to make a play defensively, if that's where Alabama's not as strong, oh, guess what? Bryce Young ran for 100 yards last week, and that's something he really hadn't been doing at Alabama. And the kid is slippery. I mean, he is elusive. So this is a lot. I mean, Bryce Young, he may be the best quarterback in the history of Alabama, Taylor. Think about that. Joe Namath, good heavens. I mean,
the thing with Alabama, a lot of times they, at least under Nick Saban, they haven't really had to rely on the quarterback being the best player on the field. They've had so much skill, talent, and so much talent around, whether it's from an offensive line standpoint to block the quarterback to make them look even better than they may have been. But that's what makes, I think, this Alabama team even more potent, Chip, is the fact that the quarterback is probably arguably one of the best players in college football and one of the best players on that roster. I mean, you go back even to the 2020 season. I mean, Mac Jones was a 3-star and he played great, obviously became a first-round draft pick, but still nobody was expecting Mac Jones to be the star because he had so many star playmakers around him. And those star playmakers around him led to him becoming a Heisman finalist and led to him becoming a first-round draft pick. I mean, that's a lot of times the Alabama teams and obviously they've had really good quarterbacks. I'm not trying to say that they haven't, like Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, Jalen Hurts, even when he was there, he was really good too. But they haven't had to be the best player on the team, where a lot of times, and especially recent college football, I feel like a lot of times the teams that go and play for the college football playoff, their quarterback is the best player on the team, or at least one of the top ones. That's what makes Alabama really, really potent, I think, this year, with Bryce Young being another year in the offense at Alabama. He's I think he's technically a redshirt sophomore, right?
Right.
Redshirt, yeah. So he's still draft eligible. Third year there. You can say what you want about he learned Sark's offense and had to learn a different offense. It's Alabama's offense. Like, let's just call it what it is. You can say there may be a different play caller, maybe a different coordinator that's leading it, but it's the Alabama offense with the little sprinkles of the offensive coordinators that they do bring in there. So, I mean, he's a deadly weapon. I'll say that for any opposing defense, especially with another year under his belt, and probably poised to be one of the front runners for the Heisman again this year. He could win it back-to-back years. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. And Alabama could have the top 2 players selected in the NFL draft, in Bryce Young and Will Anderson. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we know DeMarvion Overshown is fast. He's fast. He's like DB fast.
Yeah.
And you saw it in the opener against Louisiana Monroe, getting the quarterback down, chasing plays down. Alabama's they have that in Will Anderson. He's that fast as well. And Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. And so that's where this is going to get fascinating for me, because obviously Quinn Ewers is going to have to play. I mean, he's going to have the Zach Calzada, and I shouldn't even say that. That's not even funny. But he's going to have to play the game of his life, like Calzada did against Alabama last year.
Hmm.
And Taylor, he's had one college game. He got sacked. I think Texas was sacked 3 times. Hudson Card was sacked. But um, Quinn Ewers has never seen speed on guys this big before. And it's just going to go up like 10 notches from what he experienced last week and from anything he experienced in his junior season in 2020 at South Lake Carroll. So I don't know how you replicate that. I don't know how you replicate Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, and Chris Braswell flying at you. And all these guys are 6'4", 240. But if Quinn Ewers can do it, and Sark's going to have to probably protect that offensive line by rolling the pocket, bootlegs, waggles, nakeds, whatever, cut the field in half, run RPO to one side of the field, try to cut down the progressions. You're probably not going to get to your 4th progression like Quinn Ewers did in the Louisiana Monroe game. So I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated because Steve Sarkisian was confident on Monday. You know, he had some swag about him. He didn't look like a guy who was, chugging Tums and trying to calm his stomach. He sounded like a guy who, was saying, "Look, if you follow this game plan like to a T," he seemed to be trying to say to his players, "You're going to be in this game. So lock in, focus, have the best week of practice of your lives, because we're going to put you in position to be in this game in the 4th quarter if we don't make unforced errors, self-inflicted wounds, turnovers, penalties." So it's fascinating because this is a total game changer in terms of potentially altering the country's perception of Texas and giving Steve Sarkisian a signature win, which he doesn't have yet. It's a golden opportunity, and no one expects Texas to win this game. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Texas LSU game in 2019. And Texas had a chance to win that game, Taylor.
Yeah, well, and I don't think LSU was given at that point of the season the credit that they ended up having at the end of the season either. I mean, that was an LSU team that I don't believe they were number 1 ranked in the country going into that Texas game. They were a top 10 team, but not that high. And then it turned out, it's kind of funny, like how that whole season played out, because Texas, everyone was talking about how Todd Orlando and the defense they needed to be fired, all of that, because LSU and this scrub Joe Burrow just took it to the house on them. And then turns out that was one of the most prolific offenses in college football history that Texas ended up facing. It's funny how, hindsight's 2020, everyone wanted to bash Texas for sucking that game. And it's like, oh, LSU did that to every single opponent. That's interesting how that played out. But yeah, I mean, this is a golden opportunity for Texas to make a statement, as you said. And sometimes I will say this, that a lot of times in college football, the teams that don't have anything to lose are the ones that can be the most dangerous ones. And that's what this is kind of showing up for Texas going into this game against Alabama. However, Chip, I'm still hesitant to even play into that storyline or anything along those lines, because it does seem like this is one of the best Alabama teams that Nick Saban has had. And that's a scary thought if you're any opponent facing the Crimson Tide this year.
I mean, it is going to be fascinating. I cannot wait for it. 11 a.m. It's a kegs and eggs. We know that Texas has had its battles with 11 a.m. kickoffs. If you can't get up for this 11 a.m. kickoff with, the Heisman Trophy winner and a Heisman Trophy finalist rolling into your crib, then I
College
don't
game
know.
day, big noon kickoff going to
Yeah,
be there. I mean, all eyes are on this game.
absolutely. And I just don't think Texas is going to get embarrassed in this game, because look, you're going to get max effort from every player on the Texas roster because of who they're playing. It's not a situation where you're going to have to worry, are the guys up for this one? Were they out too late? Alabama brings your full attention, on every snap. And we're going to find out about all the conditioning and all the, team building culture Wednesdays, all of that, because every player we talked to on Monday knows adversity is coming in this game. And a lot of them said, I want to see how we respond to it. Like, they couldn't wait. Bijan Robinson's like, I'm looking forward to it. Adversity makes you stronger, makes you closer. Well, yeah, if you like each other and you care about each other. If you don't, it can drive everyone back into their own corner of the room. So this is going to reveal some stuff. But as we've said, throughout the summer, this game should not define if Alabama wins the turnover battle, wins the game by 30, or it's not close in the fourth quarter and fans are leaving. This game should not define Texas because of just how good Alabama is and the fact that Texas is youthful in some key positions. 2 freshmen starting on the offensive line. In a quarterback starting his second college game. So I just can't wait. I know we need to break down stuff and all of that, but Taylor, I'll just say this. I mean, you've got Jahmyr Gibbs at running back for Alabama. He transferred in from Georgia Tech. This guy can break it. He's got breakaway speed. Those folks who are, used to Derrick Henry and big Eddie Lacy, the big bangers, Jahmyr Gibbs is a guy who can fly. And so that's interesting. He averaged 10 yards a carry last week against Utah State. And they're deep. I mean, Trey Sanders is in this running back room. Taylor, one of the top recruits from 2 years ago. Everyone, was hoping at Texas, maybe Trey Sanders will come here. And I think he ended up committing to every school under the sun before landing it at Alabama. But anyway,
3 years ago, right?
3 years ago.
Yeah, he was 2019 class.
So you've got a loaded running back room. You've got, how about Jermaine Burton at wide receiver? He played at Georgia last year, and Georgia was all about their tight ends. And so Jermaine Burton's beats Alabama, helps beat Alabama, and then transfers to Alabama because he's looking at Jameson Williams and John Mechie catching 75 passes a year. And he's like, yeah, let me get some of that because their receivers keep going in the first round. So you'll be looking at Jermaine Burton. And then, defensively, obviously, I mean, Henry To'oTo'o transfers from Tennessee, leads the team in tackles last year. He's projected as he's definitely projected as a first day pick. And they're just strong up the middle of that defense. They got plenty of experience in rotation at the defensive tackle position, in addition to Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell coming off the edge. And then Henry To'oTo'o in the middle and Jordan Battle, the total quarterback of that secondary, has seen it all. Nothing's going to fool him. You're going to have to win one-on-one battles. Jatavian Sanders is going to have to get a great matchup and make a great contested catch and get loose. Maybe a DB falls down in one-on-one coverage with Xavier Worthy. I'm not trying to be silly here, but Texas needs things to go right on Saturday in this game. And if it does, hey, Sark brought up his first year at Washington when he had a home game against USC, the number 3 team in the country, and they were a 20-point dog. And they fell behind 10-0 early and couldn't stop the run. And then they, buckled down and got some breaks, and suddenly it's tied, and Washington ends up upsetting USC in a massive win for Steve Sarkisian and the momentum of that program. And Sarkisian was asked about it this week and said, yeah, similar scenario. I mean, USC had Matt Barkley. I think, wasn't he a perfectly rated quarterback too? I mean, I think he, Vince
I don't
Young, and
think
Quinn
so.
Ewers are like the only
I don't
ones.
think so. I think that it was Vince Young, then Quinn Ewers was the next one. I think. I could be wrong though.
Well, Barkley was a big time,
Yes, he was.
quarterback,
Yeah.
and Washington had Jake Locker, who was like a fullback playing quarterback. He was like those old A&M quarterbacks like Bucky Richardson. But anyway, Washington won that game, and Steve Sarkisian can talk about that with his team. He can talk about knowing, Alabama's personnel inside and out. The funny thing is, there are current players on the Alabama defense who went up against Sarkisian's offense in practice every day too.
Right. With
So,
probably some better playmakers that they had on the Alabama offense too.
yeah,
That's not a knock on Texas either. It's just that's how good that team was. Jalen Waddles, Devonta Smith. I mean, all of those guys, like that's what they were facing in that offense.
yeah, and if it comes down to a field goal, I mean, Alabama, which has had horrible field goal kicking throughout Nick Saban's 16 years there, now probably has their best field goal kicker under Nick Saban in Reichard, the Alan Reichard. I want to say Will Reichard. Sorry, Will Reichard. He was 22 of 28, and they trust him in big opportunities, big situations, and they've got an experienced punter as well. So Texas, man, they were firing the holder after a field goal the other night, and Isaac Pearson gets benched for Hudson Card as the holder after Pearson couldn't hold on to a snap on a 38-yard field goal attempt that looked like something, looked like Bert Auburn threw up on himself on that attempt. But just saying, Alabama experience field goal kicker, another area where you have to look at all these matchups and you're trying to find an edge for Texas. I'm not sure that is going to be an edge for Texas.
Where do you think there is an edge for Texas, if there is an edge for Texas, Chip?
The home field advantage, the crowd.
Does that work though? I feel like sometimes that's worked against Texas at times.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be, I just can't wait to see this because, you've heard that, Gary Patterson, he loves to look at opponents, and he starts in April, and I hear he's got all kinds of ideas for this game. Okay, what are you going to do? You're going to sneak a 12th player onto the field on defense? I mean, there's just, but you know what? Guys grow up, and the guys who love the bright lights, they rise to the occasion. You may see a guy on Saturday who you thought was just okay for Texas have the game of his life and surge with confidence and be a different player. That's what kind of game this is. And we talk about the Texas-Oklahoma game and the crucible of the Cotton Bowl and all the, the weight of the fan bases split at the 50, and you make a play in that game, you're a legend for life. You find a way to win this game, you're a legend for life. You'll be a Longhorn legend. You beat the number one team in the country. Some say might be Nick Saban's best team ever. 2 Heisman Trophy winner and a Heisman finalist on the field. Oh, babe, this is a golden opportunity for these Horns to, for players to grow up and make big time plays, and for this program to finally get talked about again for something other than flailing.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. And I will say though, one thing, I feel like, we're talking this game up. It's a huge game. There's no doubt about it. But I also don't think that this is a program defining game for Texas either, because they are a 20-point underdog for a reason. I mean, that's not any reason other than Vegas sees what this game is, the differential of talent, the differential of the state of the programs, I think. So I don't necessarily think that anybody that's a Texas fan, if Alabama, wins by 20 points. I don't think if you're a Texas fan, you should leave the stadium being like, oh, we're doomed for the rest of the year. I just don't think so. I think it'll just be a good kind of starting point of where Texas is in terms of becoming a dominant program in the SEC when they're going to be moving to that conference. That's what Alabama has been for the last decade, of college football. They've been that dominant program more times than not. And so that's like I feel like if Texas wins, you celebrate this. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win the national championship. I don't think either. But on the flip side, if they do lose by 20, I don't think you leave this game being like, we suck, or here we go, 5-7 season is on the table for us this year. I don't think that Texas fans should leave that game this way. I think you got to find the small moral victories. And I am the very much not the participation trophy type of person. Like, a loss is a loss is a loss. And I just look at that. But at the end of the day, when you're facing a team that is this like such an elite team in the sport and such an elite team in the program, or as a program in college football, especially over, historically, but this last run that Nick Saban has had at Alabama has been such a monstrous run, a dynasty type of program. You got to take the wins where you can get them. And if the scoreboard does not end up in Texas' favor, I don't think that this is the end all be all for the team or the season for Texas in 2022. And maybe I'm crazy. I don't know, Chip. Maybe I am.
Well, crazier things have happened. Like I said, Texas had that 9-1 run against Nebraska, and it included a win over a team that had Ndamukong Suh and Jared Crick on the defensive line. Ndamukong Suh sacked Colt McCoy 4.5 times in the Big 12 championship game in 2009, and Jared Crick sacked him 2.5 times. And that was probably the most dominant defensive line I've ever seen face a Texas team. And that's the comparison that we're getting this weekend with Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell. So let's see how Texas, tries to scheme around it. Because look, what if Alabama has the drops? What if their receivers are not as dialed in at 11 a.m. and they have the drops, and there's, a punt return for a touchdown by Xavier Worthy, who loves the big stage. We know that. Just go back to last year's OU game. Who knows? Who knows? I'm not saying no, and I'm sure we'll get into it in Love It or Leave It. But look, that's why we love college football, because you can have crazy things happen, like Texas beating Nebraska in the '96 Big 12 title game, like Sark's Washington team knocking off number 3 USC in 2009, because sometimes it just lines up in your favor. You get a break, you get some momentum. There's a seed of doubt. And Alabama did play in some close games last year. Played in a lot of close games. Right. Alabama fans talk about narrow wins over Florida, narrow wins over LSU, the loss to A&M. They beat Georgia in the regular season, and then, couldn't sustain it in the national championship when Jameson Williams went down. Their receiver went down with an injury. So this is going to be fun. But you're right, Taylor. Texas fans should not be walking out of the stadium, thinking if Texas gets run that, I'm going to sell all my tickets the rest of the season. No, watch these young guys grow. Watch Kelvin Banks grow. Watch Cole Hudson grow. Watch Quinn Ewers grow. And let's see what all this recruiting can look like with development. And that's the key, because Texas has had a lot of highly ranked recruiting classes, but they haven't had the development and the sustained momentum that the program needs. And we all know that the fan base can help influence recruits, all that. So it's a big recruiting weekend for Texas. Make sure you get over to horns247.com and follow everything that Mike Roach and Hudson Standish are putting out, because it's not only a big recruiting weekend for football. Jared Elliott, the volleyball coach, told me he's bringing in, recruits, because every recruit's dad wants to come see Texas Alabama play.
I bet. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think if you're Texas, you just got to hope that the mistakes are made by Alabama and that Texas answers and takes advantage of those opportunities. You want to force miss opportunities for Alabama, and you want to take advantage of any miss opportunities that they may have on Saturday.
I get the feeling that fans are worried that they could see some of the hangdog stuff that they saw last year. I don't think so. I think you're going to get the best effort of every Texas player. You're probably going to see some guys play like you've never seen them play before, because the heightened sense of awareness and just looking across at that helmet and that, crimson tide, it should bring everything out of you. You should get the best effort you've ever seen from, a Texas football team, probably since beating Georgia in the Sugar Bowl in 2018. So I do think
that had nothing to lose. They played that game like they had nothing to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you'll see the same thing. Now, I don't know if it'll be a win, but I think you'll get a great effort from Texas. And I think it'll be, I think it'll be interesting. Yeah. All right, Taylor. Good stuff. You ready for some love it or leave it?
I am. Before we get to love it or leave it, we're going to take a really quick break, but stay tuned because we have much more Texas Alabama talk and preview coming up. We'll be right back. And if you're watching us on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on here to love it or leave it. Chip, you ready for some love it or leave it?
I'm ready.
All right. My first one for you is love it or leave it. For Texas to have a chance to upset Alabama, Quinn Ewers will have to throw for the same number of touchdowns as Bama's Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Vince Young.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably going to love this, because whether it's throwing the same number of touchdowns or running for the same number of touchdowns, I do think that Quinn Ewers is going to have to match. He's going to have to match Bryce Young, and I think that's a lot to ask. But Zach Calzada did it last year. I mean, that's what I keep coming back to. I keep coming back to Zach Calzada, Taylor. Zach Calzada's not even in the two deep at Auburn.
I was going to say, yeah, he's not starting anywhere.
He's saving him. Are they saving him for the Alabama game, the Iron Bowl this year? But my gosh, I keep coming back to Zach Calzada. Zach Calzada found a way to beat this Alabama team that probably would have won the national championship, because they did hammer Georgia in the regular season. Probably would have won the national championship if Jamison Williams, their stud receiver who went in the first round, didn't get hurt. So, but yeah, I'm going to love this. Quinn Ewers is going to have to match Bryce Young. And that means he's going to have to get some help from the Texas defense in making Bryce Young uncomfortable or getting him to make a rare mistake. Taylor, how about you?
I'm going to have to... I'm going to, I'll love it. I would say that I think Quinn Ewers probably needs to outplay Bryce Young a little bit, and that would be more of a credit to the Texas defense getting after Bryce Young and giving the offense more opportunities to have more scoring opportunities. So, yeah, I think that Quinn Ewers has to play toe-to-toe or better than what Bryce Young does. But overall, I think that the Texas defense has to play better than Alabama's defense, and that's a huge, 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 tall task to ask of a defense that is kind of in the show me, don't tell me stage, obviously, but the rebuilding a little bit after last year. There's new faces across the board at different positions. So I think it's going to be a whole team effort. I don't think it's going to just fall on Quinn Ewers' shoulders or anything along those lines. But I do think at the end of the day, he's got to play as good, if not better, than Bryce Young to keep Texas in this game, because I think it could get ugly real quick too.
Yeah, and I'll just say this, because we haven't talked a lot about Bijan Robinson, who's a Heisman candidate, and what his impact can be on this game. I'll just say that the Alabama defense just they don't allow teams to run for 100 yards, let alone single backs. If if Bijan Robinson could pull off a Ricky Williams or an Earl Campbell in this game and somehow make this Alabama defense look overmatched, then his stock will go through the roof. And he can do it catching the football too. We know he can catch the football. We saw that last week on his touchdown catch and run, and Bijan Robinson can impact this game in a lot of different ways. So he could be the star, but I agree. I think the way that Texas is going to have to beat this Alabama defense is on the perimeter. You're going to have to make plays against man coverage in the throwing game, and that is going to mean Quinn Ewers. Okay, love it or leave it, number 2.
Yeah, and just real quick, just to say where Alabama is as a rush defense. Last year, they were, I think, 4th in the country against the run, and they gave up 86 yards per game to opponents. So that is the type of caliber of run defense that they're going to be facing. But second one is love it or leave it. Saturday's game will end up being a shootout with the point total going over Las Vegas projection of 64.5 points scored.
Wow. If the point total goes over, that is great news for Texas, because that means we're in a shootout and Texas is making plays against that Alabama defense. I'm going to leave this. I mean, so you're telling me that like 30, 35, 31 would put the point total over. Man, I know that A&M and Zach Calzada put 41 on this defense last year. I just don't think Alabama's going to come out flat like they did in that game. I'm going to leave this. I think it goes under 64.5. And I'll just leave it at that. Taylor, how about you?
I mean, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. I think if the point total goes over the 64.5 points scored, it's because it's a blowout against Texas. So I'm not going to say it's a shootout. I think it would be a blowout. So I guess I would leave it in saying that. I do kind of see that on the table. And I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer. I'm trying to be real here. I mean, Vegas puts a 20-point underdog at home, when that to me says a lot. And if Texas just, shocks the world, then I will be happy to eat crow, because I know that our message board will be on fire in a good way and not a dumpster fire. So I'm going to leave it in saying it wouldn't be a shootout. It would be more so that Alabama just dominated the game.
Okay. All right. Love it or leave it, number 3.
Final one here is love it or leave it. There will be a non-offensive touchdown scored by one or both teams on Saturday.
Oh, sure. I'm going to love this. I mean, you got Jeff Banks, who is just the master of special teams. He drew up that punt block that turned into Texas's first touchdown of the season. I know he's going to have something drawn up for Alabama, and Alabama is the program of the non-offensive touchdown. I mean, under Nick Saban, no program in college football has more non-offensive touchdowns since he took over there. Well, since 2008. He took over in 2007. So I'm going to say that I love this. I think we will see something unconventional in this game. And for Texas's sake, you need that unconventional to go in your favor and put a tiny seed of doubt or some way of making Alabama players think, man, this just isn't our day. So I'm going to love this, Taylor. How about you?
Yeah, I'll love it too. I think one or both teams, I'll say. I'm not sure if Texas will be one or if it's both, and that's a good sign. But yeah, I mean, I think that they're going to dial up a lot of different things for this Alabama team. You mentioned, with Jeff Banks, the familiarity there from a special teams perspective. it's not going to hurt Texas in any way, shape, or form. But I would not be surprised if there was a non-offensive touchdown scored by at least one team, if not both. And if it's both teams, or if Texas is the one team, then that's a good sign, because I think you got to take any points that you could possibly get if you're Texas in this game. You got to celebrate every point that you can get. You got to take advantage of any opportunity that you get against the number one ranked team like this Alabama team. So yeah, I'll love it and say there will be a non-offensive touchdown scored. And for Texas fans, I hope it's in their favor.
Yeah. All right, kids, there you have it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Anytime you put these helmets together on the same field with game day in town, Fox's big noon kickoff. We mentioned Flo Rida is performing on the Longhorn City Limit stage before the game. Plus, you got angry Alabama fans. They're not happy that Texas's ticket allotment is like all in the upper deck. Now, so Alabama fans are having to go to the secondary ticket market, and they're having to spend way more than they wanted to just so that they're not in the upper deck. Now, when Texas goes to the SEC has a policy that requires that at least half of the ticket allotment is in the lower bowl. So that's why Texas is reconfiguring its student section. They had it in the south end. Now the students are back in that northeast corner, because starting in 2024, SEC fans will have a sliver of seats in the lower bowl that go right up into the upper deck. So that's where visiting SEC fans will sit once Texas is a league member. As of right now, they can hose Alabama fans. Now, Texas fans better be ready to get hosed next year. Yes. Because, you know, the funny thing is Chris Del Conte and Greg Byrne, the athletic director at Alabama, are friends. Like they talk a lot. So, and when you're the AD at Texas and the AD at Alabama, and your football programs are what they are, or your earning revenue power is what it is, you should be talking a lot. These guys should be helping to frame whatever college football is going to look like for the next 15, 20 years. But yeah, Alabama fans are not happy about where they're going to be sitting, and they're not bringing their band. So
yeah,
there you go. All right, Taylor, any other thoughts on this massive showdown between these iconic programs?
I mean, I think if you're a fan, and this is easier, I think, for you and me, Chip, to take this perspective of it, is this is what makes college football amazing. I mean, this is what college football is about. These two, historic powerhouse type of programs just coming together, so many different storylines to watch, so many different, things to pay attention to in this game. I mean, this is college football at its best, in my opinion. And I know it's easier for us to say that more from the outside watching this, as media members, not really having a straight up, allegiance to either program or anything along those lines. Obviously, I think that we would probably pull for Texas for the sheer fact that with our Horns 24/7 members who we love and adore, and we want them to be as happy as possible. We want them to see a win. But at the end of the day, I just think this is what makes college football so special. I'm really excited just to take it all in, honestly. And, if Texas ends up pulling the upset, it's going to be a wild weekend in Austin, Texas. I'll say that.
Yeah. A preview of a soon-to-be conference game. Mm-hmm. But that's for another day. Today, it's about bad blood, history, familiarity between these coaches, and some really, really good football players taking the field, trying to get over on the other. And, when you talk about Bijan Robinson going up against Will Anderson, that's worth the price of admission right there. And what if Quinn Ewers is a freak and decides in his second college game to become Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs, not of his early days at Tech? Then this kid's, his star potential goes through the roof. So we'll watch it and we'll talk about it right here next week on the Flagship Podcast. For Taylor Estes, I am Chip Brown. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. And until then, stay safe and keep the faith.